Hello and welcome. If you enjoy calm stories like this, tap like and subscribe for a new one each day. Let's begin. Once upon a time, in a world that was both very much like and very different from our own, there were voices and stories and ideas, but they traveled in slow, old-fashioned ways. They moved on paper, carried by trucks and planes. They flew through the air as radio waves to be caught by single radios, or as television signals to be displayed on single screens. They traveled as voices through telephone wires, connecting one person to one other person. The world was full of conversations, but they were all separate like little islands of light in a vast, dark ocean. Even the cleverest machines of the time, the great electronic brains called computers, were lonely. They were enormous things, filling entire rooms with their humming racks and blinking lights. They could think faster than any human, calculate sums that would take a person a lifetime, but they couldn't talk to each other. A computer in California had no way of sharing its thoughts with a computer in Massachusetts. Each one was a brilliant mind locked in a silent room. But in the minds of a few dreamers, a new idea was taking shape. It was a whisper of a thought, a wild and wonderful what if. What if, they wondered, we could connect all these lonely minds? What if we could build bridges of information between them, creating not just a connection, but a whole new kind of space? A space where ideas could travel at the speed of light, where knowledge could be shared instantly, and where the voices of humanity could join together in a single global conversation. This is the story of that idea. It's the story of how a handful of dreamers, builders, and believers spun a web of light around the world. It's the story of the birth of the internet, the greatest connecting of things that has ever been. It didn't happen all at once. It was built piece by piece, idea by idea, over many, many years. And it all started not with a bang, but with a quiet question. How do we help friends talk to each other, even when they are very, very far apart? Chapter 1: The Dreamers Before the Dream. Our story begins long before the first wire was laid, in the mind of a man named Vannevar Bush. It was the year 1945. The world was just emerging from a long and terrible war, and Bush, who had helped guide the scientific effort of the United States, was thinking about the future. He saw a mountain of human knowledge growing higher and higher every day, so high that no single person could ever hope to see the top. Scientists were making discoveries so fast that they couldn't keep up with what their colleagues were doing in the next building, let alone across the ocean. In a famous article, he imagined a machine he called the Memex. It was a desk, but a very special kind of desk. It had slanted screens where you could read books, papers, and letters that were all stored on tiny microfilm. But the real magic of the Memex was how it connected things. If you were reading an article about ancient bows and arrows, and it mentioned the elasticity of yew wood, you could, with the press of a button, create a link, a trail of association, directly to a scientific paper on wood fibers. You could build your own web of knowledge, connecting ideas in a way that mimicked the very way the human mind works, leaping from one thought to the next. The Memex was never built. The technology of 1945 wasn't ready for it, but the idea, the seed of the dream, had been planted. The idea that we could use machines not just to calculate, but to connect and associate information in new and powerful ways. The years rolled by. The 1950s gave way to the 1960s. The world was now caught in a different kind of conflict, a quiet, tense standoff called the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union faced each other, each with powerful weapons and powerful computers. The American military relied on a centralized command and control system. All the important messages went through one or two major hubs. This was efficient, but it was also very dangerous. A single, well-aimed attack could cut the head off the snake, leaving the entire communication system in ruins. A thoughtful man named Paul Baran, who worked at a place called the Rand Corporation, was given the job of figuring out how to solve this problem. How could you build a communications network that could survive an attack? He thought, and he thought, and he came up with a revolutionary idea. Don't build a centralized network, like a spider's web with a spider in the middle. Instead, build a distributed network, like a fishing net. In a fishing net, if you cut one of the ropes, the rest of the net still holds together. And how would the messages travel across this net? Baran had an even more radical idea for that. Don't send a whole message in one long stream, like a train on a track. Instead, he proposed, chop the message up into little pieces, little blocks of data. Each block would be put into a digital envelope with the address of where it was going and where it came from. Then you could toss these envelopes into the network, and they would find their own way to their destination, hopping from point to point, like a person hopping from stone to cross a river. If one path was blocked, the little message block could just try another. At the other end, the receiving computer would reassemble all the blocks in the right order to read the original message. He called this idea packet switching. It was brilliant. It was robust. It was, people thought, completely impossible. The telephone company, which ran all the wires in those days, said it couldn't be done. Their system was built for continuous sounds, for the human voice, not for little chopped-up blocks of data. So, for a while, Paul Baran's brilliant idea also sat on a shelf. But the dream was getting closer. At the same time, another visionary man named J.C.R. Licklider, or Lick to his friends, was having similar thoughts, but for a very different reason. He wasn't a military strategist. He was a psychologist and a computer scientist. He saw computers not as weapons or calculators, but as tools for human collaboration. In 1962, he wrote a series of memos about his idea of an intergalactic computer network. He imagined a future where everyone could use simple terminals to access information and powerful programs from anywhere in the world. He dreamed of a future where scientific communities weren't separated by geography, but were connected in a vast digital space, sharing data, programs, and ideas instantly. Lick went to work for the government's Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA. This was a special place, created to fund daring, high-risk, high-reward scientific research to make sure the United States stayed ahead in science and technology. At ARPA, Lick didn't build the network himself, but he did something just as important. He found the other dreamers. He funded the work of people at universities across the country, people who were as excited as he was about the idea of connecting computers. He created a community of believers. He was the Johnny Appleseed of networked computing, planting the seeds of his intergalactic network in the most fertile minds he could find. So, by the middle of the 1960s, all the ingredients were there, waiting. There was the dream of the Memex, a machine for linking knowledge. There was the military need for a network that could survive an attack. There was the brilliant technical idea of packet switching, of chopping up messages into little blocks. And there was the collaborative vision of an intergalactic network that would connect all the great minds of the world. The stage was set, the characters were waiting in the wings. All that was needed was for someone to raise the curtain. That someone was ARPA. Chapter 2, The First Word. In 1966, a man named Robert Taylor, who had taken over Licklider's old job at ARPA, had a problem. In his office, he had 3 different computer terminals. One connected to a computer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. Another connected to a computer in California. A third connected to a different project. To talk to each computer, he had to get up and move to a different terminal. It was clumsy and inefficient. We ought to have one terminal that can talk to any of them, he thought. And in that simple, practical thought, the project that would become the Internet was truly born. Taylor went to his boss, a man named Charles Hertzfeld, and asked for the money to build this experimental network. He explained the vision, the idea of linking the country's most powerful computers together to share their resources. Hertzfeld listened, and in just 20 minutes, he approved the plan and gave Taylor $1 million to get started. The project was called ARPANET. Now they had to figure out how to build it. The job of designing the network fell to a man named Larry Roberts. Roberts brought together all the best and brightest minds from the community Licklider and Taylor had nurtured. They debated and argued. Should the network be controlled by one big central computer? No, that would be too vulnerable, just like the old military system. They needed a distributed network, like the one Paul Baran had imagined. But the big university computers, the hosts, were all different. They were made by different companies, ran different software, and spoke different languages. Getting them to agree on a single way to talk to each other would be impossible. It would be like trying to get a dog, a cat, and a fish to have a conversation. This is where they came up with the next brilliant idea. They wouldn't try to change the big host computers at all. Instead, they would put a smaller, identical computer at each location. This little computer's only job would be to handle the network connection. It would be a translator, a post office, and a traffic cop all in one. The big host computer would just hand its message to this smaller computer, and the small computer would chop it up into packets, put the right addresses on them, and send them out into the network. When packets arrived, the small computer would grab them, check them for errors, and reassemble them before handing the complete message to its big host computer. They called this little computer an Interface Message Processor, or IMP. It was a genius solution. It meant the network could connect any kind of computer, no matter what language it spoke, because the IMPs all spoke the same language to each other. They would be the universal translators for this new digital world. A company called Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, or BBN, won the contract to build these IMPs. The team at BBN was young, brilliant, and worked at a furious pace. They built the first IMP, a rugged, refrigerator-sized blue machine, in just 9 months. In the late summer of 1969, a historic year when humanity first set foot on the moon, the first IMP was loaded onto a truck and driven across the country to the University of California, Los Angeles, or UCLA. There, a team led by Professor Leonard Kleinrock was waiting. Kleinrock was a pioneer in the mathematics of networks. He had literally written the book on the theory behind packet switching years before. He and his students connected the IMP to their big host computer. A few weeks later, the second IMP arrived at the Stanford Research Institute, or SRI, hundreds of miles to the north in California. At SRI, a team led by Douglas Engelbart was waiting. Engelbart was another legendary visionary. He had invented the computer mouse, Windows on a screen, and video conferencing years before anyone else. His team was all about using computers to augment human intelligence. Now there were 2 nodes in the network, 2 lonely computers, each with its little blue translator, connected by a high-speed phone line. The time had come for the first test, the moment of truth. On the evening of October 29th, 1969, a young student programmer at UCLA named Charlie Klein sat at a teletype terminal. He was going to try to log in to the computer at SRI. The command to do so was login. He had a telephone headset on, talking to his counterpart at SRI. "Okay," he said into the phone. "I'm going to type the L." He typed the letter L. "Did you get the L?" he asked. "Yep," came the voice from SRI. "We got the L." Charlie Klein's screen showed the L. So far, so good. He typed the letter O. "Did you get the O?" "Yep, we got the O." He typed the letter G. And then the system crashed. The computer at SRI went down. The very first message ever sent over what would become the internet was "lo," as in, lo and behold, it was an accidental, but somehow perfect, first word. A word of surprise and discovery. They got the system running again about an hour later, and this time they successfully typed login. The connection was made. A person at one computer had controlled another computer hundreds of miles away. It worked. The network was alive. It was a quiet, humble beginning. There were no flashing headlines in the newspapers, no television cameras. Only a handful of graduate students and engineers knew that something profound had just happened. A doorway had been opened that would never be closed again. By the end of that year, 1969, there were 4 nodes in the ARPANET: UCLA, SRI, the University of California, Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. It was a tiny 4-cornered net, but it was a start. The great connecting had begun. Chapter 3: The Language of the Net. The ARPANET grew quickly. Throughout the early 1970s, more and more universities and research centers were connected. Each new node made the network more valuable. With 4 nodes, there were a handful of paths. With 20 nodes, there were thousands. The fishing net was getting bigger and stronger. The researchers who used the network were a close-knit community. They all knew each other. They started inventing ways to use this new tool. The first, most obvious use was remote login, just as Charlie Klein had done. A scientist in Illinois could run a program on a special supercomputer in California without leaving his office. This was a huge deal, as it meant expensive computing resources could be shared by everyone on the network. Another use was file transfer. They created a file transfer protocol, or FTP, which was a set of rules for sending a whole file from one computer to another. Now, a research paper or a set of data could be sent across the country in minutes instead of days by mail. But the use that nobody predicted, the one that took everyone by surprise, was email. In 1971, a BBN engineer named Ray Tomlinson was working on a program that let users on the same computer leave messages for each other. He was also familiar with the file transfer program used to send files between computers on the ARPANET. He had a clever idea. What if he could combine the two? What if he could send a message file from one user to a user on a completely different computer? He tinkered with the code, and he got it to work. He sent the first ever network email to himself from one teletype in his room to another right next to it. The message, he later recalled, was probably something meaningless, like "QWERTY But to send a message to another person, he needed a way to address it. How would the computer know which user the message was for and at which computer they were located? He looked down at his teletype keyboard, and there it was, the @ symbol, the @ sign. It was perfect. You could write a user's name, then the @ sign, then the name of their host computer. Tomlinson at BBN Tenexa. It was simple, elegant, and it made perfect sense. Ray Tomlinson chose the @ sign, and in doing so, he gave us the format for every email address we still use today. Email was an immediate runaway hit. It was the killer app of the ARPANET. Within a couple of years, almost 3/4 of all the traffic on the network was email. The researchers were using it for everything. They used it to coordinate their work, to ask questions, to share discoveries. But they also used it to argue about science fiction novels, to organize wine-tasting parties, and to share jokes. They created the first mailing lists, where a message sent to one address would be automatically distributed to a whole list of subscribers. One of the most popular early mailing lists was called SF Lovers for science fiction fans. This was something new. The network wasn't just a tool for connecting expensive machines. It was becoming a tool for connecting people. It was a new kind of social space. It was building a community. But as the 1970s wore on, a new problem began to appear. The ARPANET was no longer the only network in town. Other people, inspired by ARPA's success, were building their own packet-switched networks. There was a satellite network, a radio network for connecting computers in moving vehicles, and other networks in Europe. And none of them could talk to each other. Each network was its own separate universe, with its own rules and its own language. It was like having a telephone system for New York and a completely different, incompatible one for California. You couldn't call from one to the other. This was a huge problem. The whole point of the dream was to connect everything, not to create more digital islands. Two young researchers, Vint and Cerf, a graduate student at Stanford, and Robert Kahn, who was now at ARPA, took on this grand challenge. They had to figure out a way to create a network of networks, an internetwork, or internet for short. They sat down in a hotel lobby in San Francisco in 1973 and started sketching out ideas on the back of an envelope. Their core idea was both simple and profound. They accepted that all the different networks would be different. They wouldn't try to force them all to be the same. Instead, they designed a new kind of packet, a universal container that could travel across any kind of network. Imagine you want to send a fragile glass vase from Paris to Tokyo. The French Postal Service has its own rules and its own boxes. The Japanese Postal Service has different rules and different boxes. So what do? You first pack the vase in your own sturdy, standard box, with the final Tokyo address written clearly on the outside. Then you give that box to the French Postal Service. They don't care what's inside your box. They just see it as another package. They put it in one of their mailbags and send it on its way. When it gets to Japan, the Japanese Postal Service takes your box and delivers it to the final address. Cerf and Kahn's idea was just like that. Any computer that wanted to connect to this new internet would first chop its message into these new standard packets. They called these packets datagrams. Then it would hand these datagrams to its local network. The local network wouldn't look inside the datagram. It would just pass it along. At the gateways between networks, special computers called routers would look at the final destination address on the datagram and decide which network to send it to next. The datagrams would hop from network to network until they reached their destination, where the receiving computer would unpack them and reassemble the message. This whole system needed a set of rules, a protocol, that every computer would have to follow. Cerf and Kahn spent years refining this protocol. They eventually split it into two main parts. The first part was the Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP. TCP's job was to be the reliable, careful manager. When you sent a message, TCP on your computer would chop it into numbered packets. When the packets arrived, TCP on the other computer would check to make sure they all got there and were in the right order. If a packet was missing or damaged, it would send a message back asking for it to be sent again. It guaranteed that your message would arrive perfectly. The second part was the Internet Protocol, or IP. IP's job was to be the fast, no-fuss delivery service. It was responsible for the addressing, for putting the to and from addresses on each packet. IP didn't guarantee anything, it just made its best effort to deliver each packet. It was the combination of the two that was so powerful. TCP provided the reliability, and IP provided the universal addressing and routing. Together, they were called TCP/IP. It was the universal language of internetworking. It was the glue that could hold the entire digital world together. It took years of testing and refinement, but finally on January 1st, 1983, the ARPANET officially switched over to using TCP/IP. It was a momentous day, known as Flag Day. Every host computer on the network had to stop what it was doing and switch to the new protocol. It was a huge, coordinated effort, and it worked. From that day forward, any network that spoke the language of TCP/IP could connect to the ARPANET. The door was now open for a truly global network of networks. Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn had given the internet its voice, and now it was ready to speak to the world. Chapter 4. A Name for Every Number. As the internet grew throughout the 1980s, it was becoming a victim of its own success. With more and more computers joining the network, a very human problem emerged. It was getting impossible to remember all the addresses. In the world of TCP, IP, every computer connected to the internet has a unique numerical address, its IP address. It's a series of 4 numbers separated by dots, like 128.9, 0.32. This is how the routers know where to send the packets. For a computer, these numbers are perfect. They are logical and easy to handle. For a human, they are a nightmare. Imagine if, to call your friends, you had to remember their 10-digit phone number every single time, with no contact list to help you. That's what it was like on the early internet. There was a solution, but it was a clumsy one. A central file called hosts, txt, was kept at the Stanford Research Institute. This file was a simple list that matched the numerical addresses with human-readable names, like SRI-NIC. If you wanted to add your computer to the list, you had to call up the Network Information Center, or NIC, at SRI, and they would manually add it. Then, every computer on the internet had to periodically download the latest version of hosts, txt, to know where everything was. In the beginning, when there were only a few hundred computers, this worked fine. But by the early 80s, the network was growing exponentially. The hosts, txt file was being updated constantly, and the traffic from everyone downloading it was starting to clog the network. It was a bottleneck. The system couldn't scale. A new, more elegant solution was needed. The task fell to a researcher named Paul Makapetris. He was asked to design a system that was decentralized, automated, and could grow to handle millions or even billions of addresses. What he came up with in 1983 was one of the most important and yet invisible pillars of the modern internet, the Domain Name System, or DNS. DNS is like the internet's phone book, but it's a magical phone book. It's not a single book in a single library. Instead, it's a global distributed database. It's a system of thousands of phone books, all talking to each other. Here's how it works. Makapetris designed a hierarchical system of names. At the very top are the top-level domains, or TLDs. You know these as .com, .org, .net, .edu, and .gov, as well as the country codes like .uk or .jp. Underneath these are the domain names that people and companies register, like Google in google.com or Wikipedia in wikipedia.org. Then you can have subdomains, like mail in mail.google.com. This creates a unique human-readable name for any computer on the internet. But how does your computer turn that name into a number? This is the magic of DNS. When you type www.google.com into your web browser, your computer doesn't know the IP address for Google. So it asks. It sends a query to a special computer called a DNS resolver, which is usually run by your internet service provider. The resolver might not know the answer either, but it knows who to ask. It starts at the top. It asks one of the root servers, the master phone books for the entire internet, "Hey, how do I find the servers for .com?" The root server replies with the addresses of the servers that handle all the .com domains. Your resolver then asks the .com server, "Okay, how do I find the servers for Google.com?" The .com server looks in its list and replies with the addresses of Google's own name servers. Finally, your resolver asks Google's name server, "What is the IP address for www.google.com?" Google's server knows the answer and sends back the numerical IP address. Your resolver then passes that number back to your computer. And here's the clever part. It also remembers that answer for a little while. So the next time you want to go to Google, it doesn't have to go through the whole process again. This all happens in the blink of an eye. You type a name, and a fraction of a second later, your computer has the number it needs to send its packets. It's a beautiful, resilient system. There's no central point of failure. If one name server goes down, there are others to take its place, and it can scale infinitely. The introduction of DNS was a crucial step in making the Internet more user-friendly. It hid the complex numbers behind simple, memorable names. It was another layer of abstraction, another piece of elegant engineering that made a complex system feel simple. While DNS was organizing the Internet's addresses, the Internet's culture was also evolving. The mailing lists that had started on the ARPANET were still popular, but a new, more powerful system for discussion had emerged, called Usenet. Usenet was created in 1979 by two graduate students, Tom Truscott and Jim Ellis at Duke University. It was like a giant, distributed bulletin board system. Users could post messages to specific topic groups called news groups. These messages would then be copied from computer to computer, spreading across the network in waves. There were news groups for everything you could possibly imagine. There were serious discussions in sci, physics, and comp lang. There were heated debates in talk, politics. There were hobbies in rec arts, Star Trek and rec games, chess. And there were jokes and flame wars in alt, tasteless. It was a chaotic, sprawling, and vibrant global conversation. It was where many people first experienced the feeling of being part of a global community, of talking to people they had never met who shared their passions. This was also the era when the National Science Foundation, or NSF, got involved. The ARPANET was still primarily a military and research network, but the NSF saw that all universities, not just the big research ones, needed access to this incredible resource. So in the mid-1980s, the NSF decided to build a new, faster backbone for the Internet in the United States, called NSFNET. The NSFNET connected the country's supercomputing centers with much faster communication lines. Then, it provided funding for regional networks to be created, which would in turn connect individual universities to the backbone. This was a brilliant strategy. It created a structure for explosive growth. The government funded the main highway, and the regional networks built the on-ramps. By the end of the 1980s, the Internet was no longer just the ARPANET. It was a sprawling network of networks, with the NSFNet as its core. The ARPANET itself was decommissioned in 1990, its mission accomplished. It had been the seed, and now a mighty forest was growing from it. The Internet had its universal language, TCP, IP. It had its magical phone book, DNS. It had a thriving culture of discussion on Usenet. And it had a high-speed backbone that was connecting more and more people every day. All the pieces were in place for the next great leap forward. The technical foundation was built. The stage was set. Now, it just needed to be made accessible to everyone. It needed a friendly face. Chapter 5. Weaving the World Wide Web. For all its power, the Internet of the late 1980s was still a difficult place to navigate. There was no there. It was a collection of separate services. You used one program, called Telnet, to log in to remote computers. You used another program, FTP, to download files. You used a third program to read Usenet newsgroups. To find anything, you had to know where it was and what it was called. It was a world for experts, for academics and engineers who were comfortable with command line interfaces and cryptic instructions. There were no pictures, no friendly buttons to click, no sense of place. The information was all there, a vast library of knowledge stored on thousands of computers around the world. But it was like a library where all the books were piled on the floor in no particular order, with no card catalog to guide you. In the mountains of Switzerland, at a large particle physics laboratory called CERN, a British computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee was getting frustrated. His job was to help physicists from all over the world collaborate. They came to CERN to do experiments, then went back to their home universities. They had different computers, different software, and different ways of formatting their data. Keeping track of who was working on what and where all the information was a nightmare. Tim was a quiet, thoughtful man. He remembered the ideas of the early dreamers, like Vannevar Bush and his Memex. He thought about the power of hypertext, the idea of creating links in documents that could take you instantly to another piece of related information. Some simple hypertext systems existed, but they were all closed, proprietary systems. They only worked on one computer or with one company's software. Tim had a grander vision. What if you could create a universal hypertext system that worked across the entire Internet? What if you could click on a link in a document on your computer in Geneva and be taken instantly to a related document on a computer in Japan? What if you could weave all the documents on all the computers of the Internet into a single, vast web of information? In March of 1989, he wrote a proposal for his bosses at CERN. He called it Information Management, a Proposal. It was a modest title for a revolutionary idea. His boss, Mike Sendel, read it and scribbled on the cover, vague but exciting. He gave Tim permission to work on the project in his spare time. Tim Berners-Lee set out to build his system. He knew it needed 3 key ingredients. First, it needed a way to write these new hyperlinked documents. He invented a simple language for this, which he called Hypertext Markup Language, or HTML. It wasn't a full programming language. It was just a set of tags you could put around your text to tell a computer how to display it. A tag like HON meant this is a top-level heading. A tag like P meant this is a paragraph. And most importantly, there was the anchor tag, A, which you could use to create a hyperlink to another document. Second, It needed a way for computers to ask for these documents from other computers across the internet. For this, he invented the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP. It was a simple, fast protocol, a set of rules for a client computer to request a document from a server computer. It was like a waiter taking an order. "I'd like the document at this address, please." And the server would reply, "Here you go," and send the HTML file back. Third, it needed a way to give every single document on the internet a unique, universal address so that the links would always work. He devised a system for this called the Universal Resource Identifier, or URI, later known as a URL, or Uniform Resource Locator. It was a single, consistent format for an address. It started with a protocol to use, like HTTP, followed by the name of the server computer, like info.cern.she, followed by the path to the specific document on that server. HTTP, info.cern, chi h hypertext, www, the project, HTML. It was the global address for a single page of information. HTML, HTTP, and URLs. These were the three pillars of Tim Berners-Lee's creation. Over the course of 1990, working on a NeXT computer, a powerful black cube created by Steve Jobs after he had left Apple, he built all the pieces. He wrote the software for the world's first web server, the computer that would store the documents and listen for HTTP requests. And he wrote the software for the world's first web browser, the program that would fetch the documents and display them on a user's screen. He called his browser World Wide Web. It was also an editor, so you could browse and write web pages in the same program. On Christmas Day of 1990, the first web page went live on the server at CERN. It described the World Wide Web project itself, explaining what it was and how to use it. For the first few months, it was a quiet affair. Tim showed it to his colleagues at CERN. A few other physics labs got connected. It was a small academic web. But Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues knew that for this to truly succeed, it had to be for everyone. It couldn't be owned by CERN or by any company. It had to be an open public standard that anyone could use for free forever. In 1993, CERN made a momentous announcement. They declared that the underlying technology of the World Wide Web would be put into the public domain. Anyone could build a server or a browser without paying any royalties or asking for any permission. This was the spark that lit the bonfire. Across the ocean in Illinois, at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, or NCSA, two young programmers named Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina saw the potential. They knew that Tim Berners-Lee's browser only worked on the expensive NeXT computer. To make the web popular, it needed a browser that was easy to install and run on the ordinary computers that most people had, like PCs, running Windows and Apple Macintoshes. And it needed to be more visually appealing. In 1993, they released their browser. They called it Mosaic. Mosaic was a revelation. It was easy to install. It had a friendly graphical interface with buttons for back, forward, and reload. But its killer feature was that it could display images right in the middle of the text on a web page, not in a separate window. For the first time, the web had color and pictures. It was no longer just a tool for physicists. It was a fun, engaging new medium. NCSA made Mosaic available for free download on the internet, and the world went wild. People who had never used the internet before were suddenly clamoring to get online and surf the web. The growth was explosive. In 1993, there were just over 100 web servers in the world. A year later, there were thousands. The web was the friendly face that the internet had been waiting for. It was the simple, intuitive way to navigate the vast ocean of information. It was the graphical user interface for the entire planet. Tim Berners-Lee had woven the first few threads. Now, millions of people were rushing to add their own, creating a vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful tapestry of information that was growing faster than anything the world had ever seen. The World Wide Web was here, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 6: The Gold Rush. The release of the Mosaic browser didn't just open up the web to ordinary people, it opened it up to business. Mark Andreessen, the young co-creator of Mosaic, quickly realized that there was a huge commercial opportunity waiting. In 1994, he left NCSA and, along with a Silicon Valley entrepreneur named Jim Clark, founded a new company. They called it Netscape Communications. Their goal was to build a bigger, better, faster version of Mosaic and sell it. They called their new browser the Netscape Navigator. It was released in late 1994, and it was a phenomenon. It was faster than Mosaic, more reliable, and had new features that web page creators loved. Netscape Navigator quickly became the world's most popular browser, capturing over 80% of the market. It was the window through which most of the world first saw the World Wide Web. The success of Netscape signaled the start of a frantic, heady period that came to be known as the dot-com boom. It was like a gold rush in the old American West, but this time the territory being explored was the new digital frontier of the internet. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to stake a claim. Suddenly, venture capitalists, the investors who fund risky new ideas, were pouring billions of dollars into any company that had .com in its name. Young entrepreneurs with big ideas were becoming millionaires overnight, at least on paper. The stock market soared, led by these new internet companies. It was an era of incredible optimism and, in retrospect, incredible hype. Out of this chaotic frenzy, a few companies emerged that would go on to define the first era of the commercial web. In 1994, a man named Jeff Bezos, who had a comfortable job on Wall Street, saw a statistic that the web was growing at 2,300% per year. He knew he had to be a part of it. He made a list of 20 products that could be sold online and decided that books were the perfect place to start. There are millions of different books, far more than any physical store could ever stock. He quit his job, packed up his car, and drove to Seattle to start his company. He called it Amazon.com, named after the world's largest river. He started it in his garage, packing the books on the floor and taking them to the post office himself. It was a humble beginning for a company that would eventually become the everything store. In 1995, a French-Iranian programmer named Pierre Omidyar wanted to create a perfect marketplace, a place where the market itself would set the price for goods. As a side project over a holiday weekend, he wrote the code for a website he called Auction Web. To test it, he listed a broken laser pointer for sale. To his astonishment, someone actually bought it for $14.83. When Omidyar emailed the buyer to make sure he understood it was broken, the buyer replied, "I'm a collector of broken laser pointers." Omidyar realized he was onto something big. That little auction site grew up to become eBay, a global marketplace connecting millions of buyers and sellers. While some were building stores, others were trying to map this new, sprawling territory. The web was growing so fast that finding anything was becoming a real problem. The first solution was a directory, like the yellow pages for the web. Two Stanford graduate students, David Philo and Jerry Yang, started keeping a list of their favorite websites, organized by category. They called it Jerry and David's Guide to the World Wide Web. As the list grew, they renamed it Yahoo. It wasn't a search engine that crawled the web automatically. It was a human-curated directory. For a time, it was the most popular starting point for anyone exploring the web. But the web was getting too big for humans to catalog. A new automated approach was needed. Search engines began to appear, with names like Lycos, Excite, and Alta Vista. They sent out software spiders or crawlers that followed links from page to page, indexing all the words they found. Alta Vista was particularly powerful, with a huge index of the web and lightning-fast results. But they all had a problem. If you searched for something like car, you would get millions of pages, with no good way to know which ones were the most useful or authoritative. The results were just a long, jumbled list. Back at Stanford, two other graduate students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, had a better idea. They were studying the structure of the web itself, the way pages link to each other. They realized that a link from one page to another was a kind of vote. If an important page, like the main page of a major university, linked to your page, that was a very valuable vote. If 100 random, unknown pages linked to your page, that wasn't as meaningful. They developed an algorithm they called PageRank, which analyzed the entire link structure of the web to determine how important each page was. A page was considered important if other important pages linked to it. It was a brilliant circular definition, and it worked. When you searched on their system, it didn't just look for the words on the page. It used the PageRank to show you the most relevant, authoritative pages first. They called their new search engine Google, a play on the word Google, which is the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. They launched it from a friend's garage in 1998. Its homepage was famously simple and clean, just a logo and a search box. The results were so much better than any other search engine that it quickly spread by word of mouth. While all this was happening, the biggest software company in the world, Microsoft, had been caught off guard. Its founder, Bill Gates, had initially dismissed the internet as unimportant. But when he saw the explosive success of Netscape Navigator, he realized he had made a huge mistake. Microsoft quickly changed course and declared war. They developed their own web browser called Internet Explorer, and in 1995 they started giving it away for free. More than that, they bundled it directly into their Windows operating system, which ran on over 90% of the world's personal computers. If you had Windows, you automatically had Internet Explorer. This started the browser wars. Netscape, which charged money for its browser, couldn't compete with a free product that was already installed on everyone's computer. Over the next few years, Internet Explorer's market share soared, while Netscape's plummeted. Microsoft had won the browser war, but the battle led to a major antitrust lawsuit from the U.S. government, which accused Microsoft of using its monopoly power unfairly. By the end of the 1990s, the Internet had transformed from an academic curiosity into a global economic force. The world was wired, but the party couldn't last forever. Investors had poured so much money into so many dot-com companies that had no real business plan and no hope of ever making a profit. The bubble was stretched to its breaking point. In the year 2000 it burst. The stock market crashed. Hundreds of dot-com companies went bankrupt. Billions of dollars of investment vanished into thin air. It seemed for a moment that the dream might be over, but it wasn't. The gold rush was over, but the Internet itself was stronger than ever. The companies that survived, like Amazon, eBay, and Google, were the ones that were built on solid ideas and provided real value. The crash had cleared away the hype, leaving behind a more mature, more stable foundation on which the next chapter of the web story could be built. Chapter 7: The People's Web. The dot-com crash had a sobering effect on the digital world. The wild, speculative frenzy was gone, replaced by a more cautious and thoughtful approach to building things online. But the number of people using the Internet continued to grow relentlessly, and as more and more people came online, the very nature of the web began to change. The first era of the web of the 1990s, was largely a one-way street. It was a publishing medium. A relatively small number of people created websites, and a much larger number of people consumed the information on them. It was like a digital library or a global magazine rack. But in the early 2000s, a new idea began to take hold. People started talking about Web 2.0. It wasn't a new technology like TCP/IP or the web itself. It was a shift in philosophy. It was about making the web a two-way street, a platform for participation and collaboration. It was about harnessing the collective intelligence of the users themselves. The motto of this new era was, "Don't just read the web, write it." One of the earliest and most powerful examples of this new philosophy was Wikipedia. Launched in 2001 by Jimmy Wales and Larry Sanger, it was a wild experiment, an encyclopedia that anyone in the world could edit. The idea seemed like madness to many. How could you trust information that any anonymous person could change? Surely it would be filled with errors, vandalism, and nonsense. And in the beginning there was plenty of that. But something amazing happened. For every person who tried to vandalize a page, there were dozens of others who were willing to fix it. A community of volunteers emerged, dedicated to building and protecting this shared resource of human knowledge. They developed rules and policies. They debated, they collaborated, and they slowly but surely built the most comprehensive encyclopedia the world had ever known, in hundreds of languages, all for free. Wikipedia showed the incredible power of open collaboration. At the same time, another revolution was brewing, the rise of the blog. A blog, short for weblog, was a new kind of website, a personal journal or diary that was easy to update. Tools like Blogger, which was bought by Google in 2003, made it possible for anyone to start their own blog in minutes without knowing any HTML. Suddenly, millions of people had a platform to share their thoughts, their expertise, their hobbies, and their daily lives with the entire world. There were political blogs that challenged the mainstream media, mommy blogs that created communities for parents, and tech blogs that broke news faster than any magazine. The blogosphere became a vast, vibrant conversation, giving a voice to the voiceless and allowing ideas to spread with viral speed. But the biggest change of the Web 2.0 era was the explosion of social networking. The idea wasn't entirely new. People had been forming communities online since the days of Usenet and mailing lists. In the late 1990s, sites like classmates.com and 6degrees.com had tried to connect people online, but it was in the early 2000s that the formula was perfected. The first big social network of this era was Friendster, launched in 2002. It was based on the idea of the circle of friends, showing you how you were connected to other people through your friends and your friends' friends. It was hugely popular, but its technology couldn't keep up with its growth, and the site became slow and unreliable. Then came MySpace in 2003. MySpace gave users incredible freedom to customize their profile pages with different backgrounds, songs, and layouts. It became a cultural phenomenon, especially among young people. It was the place to connect with friends, share pictures, and discover new music. For a few years, it was the biggest social networking site in the world. But while MySpace was focused on flashy customization, a new competitor was emerging from a Harvard dorm room. In 2004, a student named Mark Zuckerberg, along with his college roommates, launched a site called thefacebook.com. At first, it was only for Harvard students. It had a clean, simple design and focused on real-world identities. You had to have a harvard.edu email address to sign up. The site was an instant hit. They quickly expanded to other elite universities, then to all colleges, then to high schools, and finally, in 2006, they opened it up to everyone over the age of 13. They shortened the name to just Facebook. Facebook's clean design and its focus on connecting with real-life friends proved to be a winning combination. It introduced the news feed, a constantly updating stream of what your friends were doing, sharing, and liking. This was a revolutionary feature that kept people coming back to the site again and again. While MySpace felt like a chaotic digital party, Facebook felt like a clean, organized extension of your real social life. By 2008, Facebook had overtaken MySpace in popularity, and it was on its way to becoming a global giant, connecting billions of people. The Web 2.0 revolution wasn't just about text. In 2005, 3 former employees of an online payment company called PayPal had an idea. They found it was often difficult to find and share video clips online, so they created a website to make it easy. They called it YouTube. The concept was simple: broadcast yourself. Anyone could upload any video. It was a massive success. People uploaded everything, funny home videos of cats, clips from television shows, music videos, educational tutorials, and personal video blogs. YouTube became the world's living room, its talent show, and its video archive all in one. A year and a half after it launched, Google saw its immense potential and bought it for $1.65 billion. By the mid-2000s, the Internet was a fundamentally different place than it had been a decade earlier. It was no longer a static library. It was a dynamic, living conversation. It was a platform powered by its users. The content was being created not just by companies, but by millions of ordinary people through blogs, wikis, social networks, and video sharing sites. The web had found its voice, and it was the voice of the people. Chapter 8. The Web in Your Hand. For its first few decades, the Internet was something you visited. You sat down at a desk, in an office or a home study. You turned on a big, beige computer. You listened to the screech and hiss of a dial-up modem, and you went online. It was a destination, a separate space that you had to make a conscious effort to enter. That all began to change in the 2000s, but the revolution truly arrived on January 9th, 2007. On a stage in San Francisco, the co-founder and CEO of Apple, Steve Jobs, stood in his signature black turtleneck and jeans. He was about to introduce a new product. Today, he said, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. He unveiled the iPhone. It wasn't the first phone that could access the Internet, but it was the first one that did it right. It had a big, beautiful touchscreen that you could control with your fingers. It had a full-featured web browser, Safari, that could display real web pages, not the stripped-down text-only versions that other mobile phones showed. And it was a powerful computer that fit in your pocket. The iPhone changed everything. It untethered the Internet from the desk. It made the web something that was always with you, in your pocket or your purse, ready at a moment's notice. A year later, in 2008, Apple launched the App Store. This was another stroke of genius. It created a simple, trusted place for people to discover and download new software for their iPhones. It unleashed the creativity of thousands of developers around the world who started building applications, or apps, for this new platform. There were apps for everything. There were apps for games, for checking the weather, for editing photos, for navigating with maps, and for reading the news. And, most importantly, there were apps for all the social platforms that had been born on the desktop web. Facebook released an app. Now, you could check your news feed and update your status while waiting in line for coffee. A new service called Twitter, which had launched in 2006, found its true calling on the mobile phone. Its short, 140-character messages were perfect for quick updates on the go. New, mobile-first social networks were born, like Instagram, a simple app for sharing beautiful, filtered photos of your life, which was eventually bought by Facebook for $1 billion. The rise of the smartphone, led by the iPhone and quickly followed by a host of competitors running Google's Android operating system, created a massive shift in how people used the Internet. It was no longer about long sessions at a computer. It was about short, frequent bursts of activity, checking a map, sending a quick message, posting a photo, playing a quick game. This shift had a profound effect on the entire digital world. Websites had to be redesigned to be responsive, meaning they could automatically adapt their layout to look good on a small phone screen as well as a large desktop monitor. Companies that didn't have a good mobile strategy were left behind. Underpinning this mobile revolution was another, quieter revolution happening in the background: the rise of cloud computing. To power all these billions of smartphones, with their constant demands for data, photos, videos, and maps, you needed a new kind of infrastructure. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft started building enormous, hyper-efficient data centers all over the world. These were vast, anonymous buildings filled with hundreds of thousands of computer servers, all connected with high-speed networks. They were the new engine rooms of the internet. They then started renting out access to this incredible computing power. This was called cloud computing. A small startup with a great idea for a new app no longer needed to buy its own expensive servers and hire a team to manage them. They could just rent the computing power they needed from Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. They could start small and, if their app became a viral hit overnight, they could scale up their capacity instantly just by clicking a few buttons. The cloud made it possible for the explosion of new apps and services to happen. It was the invisible foundation that held up the mobile world. Your photos on Instagram, your documents in Google Drive, the movies you streamed on Netflix, they didn't live on your phone. They lived in the cloud, on these powerful servers and data centers you would never see. By the end of the 2010s, the internet was ubiquitous. It was no longer a place you went. It was a utility, like electricity or water, that was woven into the very fabric of daily life. High-speed wireless networks, both Wi-Fi in our homes and cellular networks, like 4G everywhere else, meant we were almost always connected. The little dream of the ARPANET, to connect a few university computers, had blossomed into a global nervous system connecting billions of people and trillions of devices. The web was in our hands, in our cars, in our homes. The great connecting had reached a scale that the early pioneers could have scarcely imagined. Epilogue: the endless conversation. And so our story brings us to today. The internet is no longer a new frontier. It is the landscape in which we live. It has fulfilled the dreams of the early pioneers in ways that are both wonderful and troubling. Vannevar Bush's dream of the Memex has been realized on a scale he never imagined. With a few clicks, we can follow a trail of links from a news article to a scientific paper to a historical archive, building our own webs of knowledge. J.C.R. Licklider's intergalactic network is here. We are all connected, able to access vast stores of information and powerful computing resources from the small glass rectangles we carry in our pockets. Scientific collaboration, and indeed all human collaboration, has been transformed. But this incredible connection has also brought new challenges. The very openness and anonymity that allowed the internet to flourish has also made it a breeding ground for misinformation and conflict. The social networks that connect us with friends and family can also trap us in filter bubbles, showing us only what we already agree with and amplifying division. The vast amounts of data we share about our lives have raised profound new questions about privacy and control. The story of the internet is not over. It is a story that is still being written every day by the billions of us who use it. It is a story of technology, but more than that, it is a story of humanity. It is a reflection of our greatest hopes and our deepest fears, our capacity for incredible creativity and our potential for division. From a simple crashed message of "Lo" sent between two computers in 1969, a global conversation has erupted. It is a chaotic, noisy, beautiful, and sometimes frightening conversation. It is the sound of humanity talking to itself. The great connecting continues. New chapters are being written about artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and virtual realities. The fishing net that Paul Baran imagined to survive an attack has become a net that catches our dreams, our commerce, our friendships, and our future. And it all started with a few quiet dreamers who looked at their lonely machines and thought, what if they could talk to each other?